Wondering how much CEOs in India earn? Well, we finally have a number. The average salary of a CEO in India is approximately 14 crore rupees, an increase of 40% compared to pre-COVID times. The numbers came to light through a Deloitte India Executive Performance and Rewards Survey 2024, based on a survey of 400 companies, both listed and unlisted. Now, CEOs who are also promoters or members of the promoter family are paid approximately 16.7 crore rupees annually on average, while CEOs at professionally run firms or professional CEOs receive an average of 13 crore rupees as their compensation, suggesting that promoters who are also CEOs draw up more salaries for themselves. So while the average is high of 14 crore rupees, the median is low at 9.3 crore rupees, indicating a wide range in compensation of CEOs, albeit extremely high at 14 crore rupees. Of the total compensation that CEOs draw, more than 50% of target compensation is performance-based or pay at risk, 57% for professional CEOs and 47% for promoter CEOs. What exactly is happening here, and how do you really analyze this data? To talk about it, joining us is Prabir Jha. He is a distinguished HR strategist, founder and CEO of Prabir Jha People Advisory. Prabir, good to have you back on the show. What are we making of these hefty amounts?
Hi, Shweta. Thank you for having me on your show. And yes, it's interesting, the trends, but it's not a surprise really. I think this debate of what is the right compensation for the CEO has raged for a number of years now. For me, there are two ways of looking at it. One is, you just look at the absolute and say, my God, what a hefty salary. The other is to kind of index it and say, is this a small amount for the kind of possible value creation that a good CEO is able to offer? And I think that varies by company, by industry, and by individual. So as long as you get the right mix, actually by itself, it's not a huge number. Now, on the other side, it's also an issue about board governance. How are the NRCs of the different boards actually looking critically at the CEO compensation? The good news, however, is, and you talked about it, is that approximately 50% of compensation of a CEO is pay at risk. Now, that is a very healthy progress that compensation philosophy has made. So that means that at the end of the day, if a CEO is underperforming or is not actually delivering the scorecard, possibly there is a huge scale back that is potentially there for boards to exercise. Now, the question is, do they actually use it? And that is where I think that I don't see the practice, as rampant as I would like to see. It may be a notional cutback, but you do not really see sharp and dramatic, at least in India, cutbacks in the compensation of the CEO, because the variable pay still is not as variable in practice in India as I would like it to see.
Okay, and the median salary coming in at about 9.3 crore rupees, essentially telling you that while people on average draw, some of them who are outliers perhaps draw up a very huge salary of more than 20 crores annually, most of them on an average are on the lower side of salaries that they're drawing. In fact, the rise has only been a single digit. So while headline numbers look very astonishing at the moment, the reality may not be the same.
It may not be, and it is reflective of two things, one or three things actually. One is the industry. So, averages conceal a lot of the variance that gets built in. Every industry has its own compensation mix, has its own profitability range, and therefore its own CEO compensation range. So that's the first part. The second is the individual. At the end of the day, I see a trend wherein companies, even smaller companies or mid-sized companies, are wanting to get, and I speak also from some of my personal experience, where you are willing and wanting the right CEO to come on board. And for that right CEO, you've got to make it worth his or her time. And therefore, the compensation, that you offer to such a CEO could look at a big variance from the norm. But that's what a company, chooses to do, because you want to upgrade the quality of the CEO. So that's the second part. And the third part very clearly is that, even in the same industry and with the range of talent that the CEO mix has, ultimately every CEO performs differently. And therefore, the actual payout could be very, very different than, between X versus Y. So I think there is a logic and a rationale And I wouldn't be overly worried about 9 and 13 or 14, because for me, Shweta, very clearly today, the reality at one level is it's a war for talent, and talent has a choice. And if you want to get the appropriate CEO, you need to make the compensation structure worth getting someone to join you. Now, whether they deliver the kind of performance that you expect, and what do you do if they don't, that is the other challenge of what gets eyeballs. That at the end of the day, while you may downsize and let go a number of people because the company may not have delivered, how many CEOs lose their jobs, or how many CEOs actually have a very subpar compensation in a particular year. So I think the gap between practice and what is, at least on paper, is what actually gets the eyeballs.
Hi Prabir, good evening. Kartik here. Very interesting listening to you. I'm just curious here. Is there a divergence between what Indian origin CEOs draw in India versus expat CEOs of Indian companies draw in India versus what global CEOs in dollar terms earn in their own home countries? Is there a divergence, or do you see this as pretty much a global phenomenon?
So, at a principle level, I think it is common across the world increasingly, right? And, the philosophy or the practice of CEO compensation, I see very clearly happening the same way in almost every market. Now, the dollar number that, let's say, a guy in the US or in Europe would get, actually over the years, the gap between India or India-based CEOs and the so-called European or American headquartered CEOs, that has reduced. It's not as stark. So, it's not always straight on purchasing parity and the dollar to rupee ratio and stuff like that. I think talent has become very globally mobile, including Indian talent. So even if you were to get an Indian talent who potentially could be working overseas, or if you were to get an Indian to come back to India, from wherever he or she may be, I think, no one is taking a cut in salary just because I'm moving to India. So there is a reason of that. And as far as Indian companies are concerned, see, many Indian companies have increasingly become very global. So when you're hiring talent from across the world globally and placing them in different global locations, the corollary is that the CEO compensation also has had a bump up. So you might be hiring a president for running the US business, and the guy is in the US and is running the US business. Now, if the CEO is running a global responsibility far more than the US, obviously the CEO, even if he's an Indian or is based in India, cannot be at a significant, discount. Obviously, he will be higher. So that's really where the entire game has transformed over the last some years.
Okay, and you mentioned, in your previous answer to Shweta's question, Prabir, that boards have a responsibility as well, and their responsibility to show the door to the CEOs if they are not performing is not something that has happened quite often. On the contrary, there are also trends emerging globally, and I'm talking specifically about, let's say, Bob Iger's famous battle which just ended with Nelson Peltz at Disney. You also have a situation where CEOs exert a lot of influence on the boards to make boards decide in favor of the CEO's strategy. So how does one balance that, and then the expectations of the board, whether being met or not met by the CEO, at the end of the day become immaterial?
It's a great question, Kartik. And, actually in India, we have a long way to go. I think, it's a deeper question about the composition of the board, the competence of the NRC, to be able to take a view of the CEO or the executive compensation. I think it's quite average, so to speak. I mean, I observe a lot of that. I think it comes down to what is the quality of the board? Is the NRC actually competent enough to be able to understand all these nuances? Because everyone who's a member of the board by default does not become a great member of the NRC, right? So the composition is different. So that's the first part. Second is that the CEOs also have become smart. And I think in India, CEOs play it very, very well. They keep a bit, and it happens around December, January, even to send subtle signals about, where am I excited enough about the opportunity? Should I be meeting competition? There are many ways in which the board also gets messages that the CEO may not be stable. The reality of most companies is that their succession planning is pathetic. And therefore, it's the worst at the CEO level. And therefore, because they've not done a good job, and therefore they do not have someone who can actually, be a person to step into the CEO's shoes, their ability to push back or negotiate differently or to take harder calls on the CEO definitely gets impacted. And therefore, this noise which gets created, that the CEO finally walks away with murder or still gets, he's laughing to the bank. But, for people progressively down the line, it is tough news. That is, to me, a little bit of a hypocrisy, a little bit of low competence of the boards. And third, finally, and most importantly, at the end of the day, it's a choice that every company, every promoter, every board makes. If you want to be, held to ransom, that's a choice that you make. And then every smart CEO is happy to play it the way it suits him or her.
Okay, and before I let you go, a lot of people watching this broadcast would want to know, where should I be in the talent pipeline, if not the CEO, to get perhaps the second highest salary? Who gets to be, who gets to go home with a fat, big paycheck apart from the CEOs in the talent pipeline? That is number one. And which are the sectors, according to you, in 2024, which are going to be the most paying sectors, at least the trends looking at 2023, which are going to be different? If you could give us some sense before we let you go.
So, as sectors, there are many interesting sectors. I think the new tech space continues to be very exciting. That will attract a lot of attention. I think life sciences will continue to be very hot. IT, not really as much. I think it will be a little subdued. Financial services, my own take is going to be looking good because I think both, I think the world will possibly, maybe we'll see a bit of the year, see some turbulence till there's more clarity on geopolitics. But even in India with elections and post-elections, I think there'll be a lot of stability. So these will continue to be sectors which will continue to attract. And they have historically paid higher salaries than many others. So that's the first part. As far as the question on who else, it actually varies. I have worked in companies, and I will be honest that I think after the CEO, even as a CHRO, I possibly had the highest compensation. So it is not so much just about the function of saying the CFO or a CEO will get it. It will depend on the person. And I think the more companies are getting to start picking and choosing the kind of talent they want to attract and keep, I think salary will get very individualized, while there'll be a reflection of functions, domains, and industries, and where they are wanting to hire this guy from. Some functions are industry agnostic. Sometimes you want to hire someone from beyond your industry. So all of that will have a play, but ultimately it's the person that will be the biggest reason for being the second highest paid executive or the third highest or so on. So.
Prabir, before Shweta cuts me off, I want to have my go at one more question to you, and this one is specific to the election season. And the fact of the matter is that right now it seems that that many companies across the board are actually freezing hiring. Is it to do with elections? Is it to see what kind of policies get unrolled after the elections once a new government takes office? And more importantly, where do you see this next year and the years thereby coming to? Is it going to be an employees market or an employers market?
So, Kartik, your first question very clearly, I mean, there is a bit of wait and watch. It is a very important milestone from a policy change perspective, especially if the government were to come back, what big policy shifts would happen. I mean, there's already a lot of talk about labor reforms finally getting enacted, et cetera, depending on how tough they would take some policy calls by industry and also in the labor space. So yes, there is a wait and watch. The other thing, however, is that I personally believe that India will continue to be seeing both trends. I think it will be a free talent market. I personally believe that India is going to only get better, which means that there will be jobs. People are going to get higher salaries, but there will be many people who will also be at risk of losing jobs or stagnating, because the profile of employees that possibly will be in demand is going to take, very clearly see a change. And over the next 5 years, I think that India compensation will overall increase. Talent will continue to be a big priority. It's not easy to get the right talent, but also it will lead to a very, very sharp redistribution of talent as it stands today. The extremes are going to get more polar.
All right. Well, we hope, Kartik and I here, hoping that our need does not stagnate. Our job roles don't stagnate as media
Hashtag
people.
artificial intelligence. I mean, are you real, Shweta? What you're saying?
I am very much real. Thank you very much, Prabir, for joining in. Always a pleasure talking to you.